let's take a look at some basic Fiddler usage that you will do for typical captures for websites. So first we're going to see how do you actually capture traffic. We're going to review the sessions that are captured between the browser and the web server. We're going to look at the statistics tab so we can see basic things like the number of requests made, how many bytes were received. We'll review a chart that breaks down what are the different file types and how much of the overall request was caused by each type of file. We'll also look at the timeline, which is very interesting for showing to people to demonstrate where there might be performance concerns for larger files, so you can see all the files that are downloaded and how long they take. We're going to look at inspectors, which allow you to look at an individual session, a request or a response, and see it in different views. So for instance, there are normal raw inspectors which show you the raw request and response. But if the response happened to be an image, there's an image view that will show it as the actual image would look. And lastly, we're going to see how we can save off an archive of this session. So it's very helpful to save this because in the future we may want to come back to this, or we may need to send this to other people to look at it and help us interpret what kind of traffic is happening. So it's very common after you've done a trace to actually save the file. Let's take a look at a basic trace session that we would do with Fiddler. It's often a good practice to start out by clearing your web cache. We want to see all the requests as if someone has not been to the site before. There are some scenarios where I want to see what a return visitor looks like, but often I want to see without considering things that might already be in my cache. So I like to clear cache first. We'll go out to the Pluralsight website. Now what we can do, but by default I had Fiddler started already. I opened up the browser. Typically I'll come and turn off capturing traffic just so I've seen all the requests that went back and forth. And the first thing we'll notice, we'll look down the left side. Here are the list of, they're called web sessions. These are the individual requests that were made from the browser to the server. So I can scroll through these. You'll see that things are color coded. Let me slide this over. So we can see that the first request that went to the server was the request for the actual web page itself, and we can see that it came back about 12K. We then notice that we've got some CSS files. So they do basic color coding. So we've got some purple for CSS files, some green for JavaScript files, and the images are just gray. But I can scroll through these and look at individual requests that were made. So one of the interesting things to do right away is to look at the statistics tab. So I can go on the left here. I'm going to select all of the items. We can see that we actually made 44 requests between the browser and the server. If I look at the statistics tabs, we see that there were 44 requests made. They were made up of 8 different hosts, so we'll talk about it a little later, but as websites are developed, sometimes they will pull from CDNs or ad networks in different places, so you'll see different domain names being used. You'll see the number of bytes that were sent up with the original request, and then we'll see how much was sent back. So we can see we've got a pretty large page here that came back. I can look at the response code, so I can see that 43 of the responses were 200, which means everything was fine, and the first one was actually a redirect. I can also break down by types. I can see that a lot of the weight of this page is actually due to the images. I can see it then followed by the JavaScript and some CSS. Another nice feature on the bottom, if I want to get more of a graphical view, I can say show chart, and we'll see all the different components of that request and the sizes that came back in the particular response. Another nice view is to look at the timeline view. So as I move this across, we can see the original request for the HTML, and then you'll see browsers, when they talk to web servers, will use a number of connections to talk back to the server and make requests for files. So we can see it's going back to the server asking for some CSS files, then some JavaScript files. So you can look through the basic timeline, and again, this is very useful for times where if a request was taking a long time, sometimes telling somebody that a file is large and will impact the performance is not as dramatic as showing them the graphic to say, wow, look at, if this line were 4 seconds long, it's very obvious that that's what's causing the slowness to the client. So again, that's the timeline. I can see how things were requested and brought back. the next thing that's useful to see is the inspector. So if I want to look at the individual requests, so the first request that went up to the server, I can go to inspectors, and typically I like to look at it in just the raw mode so I can see exactly what was requested. Down here I can see that the response was encoded. Most likely it was compressed, so I'm just going to take that off and say I want to see the actual raw response. So again, we looked at requests and response earlier, but you can see that it made a GET request for the page, wants to use HTTP 1.1, some of the other headers that got transmitted to the server. We can see that the response, it did indeed use HTTP 1.1, the 200 indicate everything went okay. We can see some other information in the request, and then here's the body of the actual HTML page. So again, there's lots of different viewers depending on what you want to see. If you just want to see the headers directly, it's got a nice breakdown of just the headers made for the request. If I want to look at a particular image, I can click an image. Rather than look at the raw request below, I can use the image view and see the actual image displayed within Fiddler as well. So the inspectors are a very nice place to go when you want to see different alternative views based on what type of data it is. You have lots of different views available to you. And later we'll talk about some extensions that you can add to support, say, custom file types that you might have. You could create your own extension to add into the interface to view that in a particular way. And lastly, it's very helpful again to save a capture. So we'll come up to File, Save. We want to save off all sessions in this case, and we'll just save these off to our temp folder. And do our save. So again, I can come back and look at this in the future. If I had issues and I wanted someone else to help me, a lot of people use Fiddler, I could actually send that capture file to another developer or to someone in my ops department to say, can you please review this for me and tell me if you see anything strange about the particular request. So again, this is just a basic view. This is probably how you'll use Fiddler 75–80% of the time. Just a very basic come in, do a capture, look at some of the requests coming back and forth, and move from there.